Danica Bunnett with Bluon Energy. We're here to talk to you today about pressure set points. I'm with Jed Kennedy and Mike Mabry. And jumping into the topic, we're going to first discuss what does it mean, pressure set points.
So pressure set points are something that air conditioning systems use to maintain, proper operation and safety of the equipment.
Great.
I think it's going to fall into two different categories. You're going to have pressure safety switches, which are one you'd use on the low pressure side, so if you'd lost refrigerant, and the other one would be on high pressure side if you'd lost condenser fans or something like that, to shut the system down to prevent overpressurization and allowing it to get to an unsafe level. The second are operating controls, where the pressures will, just on a low pressure side, will load and unload the compressor to maintain the suction pressure. Could be used to cycle fans on and off on the discharge side. There are several different things that the pressures could be used for.
Okay, great. And why is it important to consider these pressure set points as you're changing to a different refrigerant, but also to TDX20?
So R22 replacements do run at different pressures, so it's important to understand what their operating pressures should be, and specifically TDX20 is energy efficient by running at lower pressures. So it's important to dial those pressure set points in to appropriate set points, or at least assess whether those set points are appropriate.
Okay.
For an example, if you were with an R22 system, you were running 220 pounds, that would equate to about 108 degrees. Well, 108 degrees on TDX20 is 187 pounds. So if you have fans coming on and off based upon R22 at 220 pounds, we would allow the pressure to climb up to the 220 pounds before it came in, where we would really want them to come in closer to the 187 pounds.
Right.
So it's important that our pressures are set appropriately. One of the really cool things about refrigerant is that it's a pressure temperature relationship. And so, I'll let Jed talk about that a little bit, but when you do a conversion, you can convert pressure from the R22 to a temperature, and then you can use that temperature to go back to a pressure that's equivalent for TDX20.
And so what he's referring to is when assessing whether an R22 set point is appropriate or not, the best way to assess that is to convert that R22 saturated pressure to a saturated temperature, and then take that temperature, reference our dual column PT chart, and depending on where your measurement's at, use the liquid column, vapor column, whichever is appropriate in order to get the pressure it should be.
And can you talk a little bit about when it's appropriate to use which column where in the system?
So vapor column, use it when the refrigerant is vapor, which is the easiest way for me to think about it is if you cut your coils in half, everything on the compressor side of that system is going to be predominantly vapor, and everything on the TXV or metering device side of that is going to be predominantly liquid. So coming out of the evaporator, you should be fully vapor. Coming out of the compressor, you should be fully discharged hot vapor. And then coming out of the condenser, you're fully liquid, and then coming out of the metering device, you're mostly liquid.
Right, and we can find this PT chart on our app as well as the website for download.
Yeah, and on our best practices, we have a pretty neat diagram that kind of illustrates that each side of the system.
Most of your high and low pressure switches and operating controls are going to use the vapor column. So.
Okay, good to keep in mind. What other pressure controls need to be considered in your system?
Well, I would say one of the most important ones is loading and unloading, because you're trying to maintain a coil temperature. And so if you don't change the pressure set point, for example, R22 typically operate about 68.5 pounds on the suction, whereas TDX20 runs at 50.5 pounds. So if you leave the R22 settings, then you're going to have a substantially warmer coil. You're never going to do any cooling. Just like with a hot gas bypass, we've got a really good best practices on that. But if you didn't adjust or replace the hot gas bypass, because the TDX20 operates substantially lower, your hot gas bypass valve would be open all the time. So it's important. You're going to run into these problems. They're not really problems, but everything is going to become a blend. The pressures are no longer going to be the same as R22. So anytime you have a pressure switch, you need to look at it and determine, what changes do I need to make for this system to operate properly. So it's important to realize that, you should take a minute and just look and see what pressure switches you have or pressure controls, and say, do I need to change this? I mean, for example, most of the train units, they turn around and they work off of saturated condensing temperature. So temperature is temperature. I don't need to worry about anything. I think it's 116, 118 degrees. Condensing temperature is what they maintain, or the coil temperatures. So I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
But if you're using a pressure control to turn fans on and off, then you're going to have to make adjustments. So just keep in mind as to what equipment you're working with, what they're controlling things with, and if you have questions, don't hesitate to call Jed.
Great. Well, thank you to the both of you, Mike and Jed. This has been Pressure Set Points. Thanks so much.